Your clients aren't forgetting because they're not paying attention. They're forgetting because what they were taking in, the information, did not make it into long-term memory. I'm Dr. Catrina Mitchum, and I've been designing and redesigning courses online since 2009. Okay, so a lot of times we give out these learning strategies for people to be able to remember information. I'm going to get ready to argue that that should be built into the design. First, we're going to cover how memory actually works and why that matters to learning. So we've got two types of memory for learning. We've got working memory, and that's where you consciously think and process in the moment. We have long-term memory, and that's where information is being stored so that we can retrieve it later, recall it later, use it later. And so gathering knowledge requires successfully moving information from your working memory into your long-term memory. But working memory is rather small, and the transfer can really only happen under certain conditions. So we tend to be able to remember around 7 pieces of information at a time, give or take 2, right? And around 20 to 30 seconds, unless it's something that we are actively rehearsing, right? Like thinking about trying to remember a phone number. For those of you that remember having to type phone numbers in manually, they don't just automatically get sent as a contact card. But basically, when your attention shifts, those things get forgotten, right? So if somebody does give you a number, whatever number to remember, you repeat it, right, repetitively in your head so that you can try to remember it, but then the dog barks and that number is gone forever. You might remember the first 2, right? And this is why students can understand something, whether that's live or in your video, like as you're talking about it, but then forget it 5 minutes later, or when it comes time to actually do it in the workbook or the activity or whatever it happens to be. As far as we know, long-term memory is unlimited and can last a lifetime, right? But information only gets put there if working memory successfully processes it, right? And that transfer requires active processing, not passive reception, right? So we can't just like sit there and listen and think that information is magically going to appear in our heads because things were coming into our ears or because words were were being read, even if you read them out loud, right? How many times have you been reading a page and realized 2 paragraphs down that you don't know what you just read? That's what's happening. We are passively receiving it as opposed to actively processing it. Okay, so then the transfer problem means that clients might watch a video, right? The information gets into their working memory, they're nodding along, the working memory is holding on to it temporarily, but when the video ends and they move on, the working memory then dumps that information if the information doesn't get transferred. So then a week later, the thing that they do remember is, oh, I know they covered this, but they searched the long-term memory and it's not there, right? So in order to actually transfer the information from short-term or from working memory to long-term memory, we want to think about it as active processing. So this is thinking, connecting, questioning. It also needs retrieval practice. What that means is pulling the information back out, but not necessarily immediately, right? Spaced retrieval is this idea that we need to forget it just long enough. We need to leave it just long enough that we forget a little bit and it's a little bit difficult to remember, and that's when things start to solidify. We also need to apply it in order for it to transfer into long-term memory. So that means using it. We can also use elaboration to move things from working memory to long-term memory, and that's when you're explaining it in your own words, right? And so none of these things are passive watching, listening, reading. They can be things even as small as my kid came home and had read something in a book at school and then came home and told me about it, right? Like that's enough to start to move the information from their working memory into long-term memory. And so a lot of times this processing of information to get it to long-term memory gets dumped onto the person trying to do the learning, right? And that can make a lot of people say, well, I taught it, but they didn't learn it. But really what you did was presented the information so that it entered their working memory. They understood it, but they didn't actively process it. And if we only put the onus of doing that on them, right? We don't know what kind of learning skills people come to us with. And so this is a place where you can actually build into the design of your course. And we want to do this, right? Because behavior change requires retrieving information from that long-term memory bank in real context. So in real life, in real situations. But if information never made it into that filing cabinet, then there's no file to pull it from. If they can't pull it from the file, then they can't apply it to the situation. And then if they can't apply it, then nothing's going to change. So passive courses are courses where working memory only is functioning and there's no long-term storage that you need in order to change a behavior. And that is also how we kind of get into, if you've ever bought a course that was like this, how we kind of get into that self-blame cycle, because the experience that we're having is watching the video and going, oh, that makes total sense. The working memory is processing it, we're understanding it. And then after the video or a week later or 5 days later or whatever, we're going, wait, what was that again? And then trying to apply it and thinking, oh, I know I learned this. What's wrong with me, right? Like that's usually the next line. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It means that there was part of the process that was missing in the design of the course or in your approach to learning. That's why some people say, oh yeah, I love courses like that, where I just sit and I watch and I listen. They are already actively processing. They already have strategies to do that. Not everybody does, right? And then when we do things like rewatch, if you've gone back and rewatched a video because you were like, oh, I know I learned this, you start to see, oh, I've seen this before. So working memory recognizes it, but it's still not transferring without active processing. So passive content consumption, basically, keeps information in your working memory or your client's working memory, and it never transfers to long-term memory. And without that shift of where we're storing the thing, we can't retrieve the information, we can't apply the information. And this is kind of where the next mistake happens, right? So a lot of people that create courses think, teach them all the information first and then have them apply it, right? So even if you've had a course that wasn't just all videos or a video vault, information first, then application is still separating those things, right? It's still separating the information from the doing, and it still breaks the transfer. In the next video, I'm going to talk through why this gather knowledge first, do things later is almost as bad as passive learning and what we can do to fix that. Again, in my newsletter, I talk about learning science every other week. The link is in the description. And I'm going to be coming out with a challenge on getting your course idea started. So be on the lookout for that. If it's not there, it'll be there next week.